So, guys, I do want to talk about Daniel Garcia, and what I really want to say is that Daniel Garcia is one of those wrestlers, for a very long time. I really did not see the potential in him, and I really just did not like, when he was doing the dance moves, and I felt that he was somebody very forced by Tony Khan. And then, the last couple of months, he's actually really changed in character. I think that, just like with Orange Cassidy, when you see him actually be a lot more serious and be a lot more brutal, you're actually going to get a good wrestler instead of somebody that's a little watered down by comedy. I do think that, as I said about like the dick dancing, he needs to get rid of that. The same way Orange Cassidy needs to get rid of the comedy kicks. So I do want to actually talk about. I do want to talk about Danny Garcia and All Elite Wrestling, and I actually want to just tell you guys how I feel about him in the sense that should he stay with AEW or NXT? I do think that in my notes, I do believe that Daniel Garcia has a better chance of being successful if he stick with AEW because automatically he could have a feud with MJF. I was saying that one of the things that could happen that I would like to see with Daniel Garcia is that how would I book things that you have the Learning Tree versus Shibata and Hook. And because Samoa Joe was actually doing some filming, what could happen is that maybe you could have Samoa Joe, but then he says, I'm just doing announcing, and then he announces Daniel Garcia is going to take his place, really. So you see them, you actually see, you actually see Daniel Garcia do a great job. You actually see him, you could even see Hook actually just cheat or use the FTW title, hit Jericho in the head, and then you see Daniel Garcia put a submission on Chris Jericho or get a pinfall on him. It would put Daniel Garcia over. And then you could set up FTW title, Hook versus Chris Jericho. If Jericho wins it all out, Hook can never ever challenge for that title again. Type of thing, really. Just so. You don't kind of just put a Hook in that thing forever and ever, really. But then he wins that, he looks good, and then what happens is that you have Will Ospreay versus MJF, and with Will Ospreay versus MJF, you would have MJF win, and that at the very end of it, Danny Garcia comes down. And he just gets on the microphone and he just he gets on the microphone, he talks to MJF and and that's that really, and then you can show some in the locker room area where, MJF and Daniel Garcia are brawling, and that's just how I would end that. And then all out, you settle it. U.S. title, MJF versus Daniel Garcia, and I would actually have Daniel Garcia win, and then he has a reign for a couple of months, really, or you could have them fight again at Wrestle Dream or something like that, really. But then you kind of go off to the races with that. But that's kind of how I would book Daniel Garcia to kind of make him a booster shot, really. And then he really needs to talk about how, he was abused by his father. He's like this. He's like AJ Styles, a little bit more edgy AJ Styles. I've overcome this shit. I've overcome that shit. I'm gonna overcome this shit with you, MJF, type of thing, really. Like how AJ Styles. He mentioned that he was kicked out. He was abused by his father. His father kicked him out, really. But AJ Styles didn't really do anything with that in wrestling, except mention the story a few times. But actually have Daniel Garcia use that anger in his wrestling. I'm never going to give up. You have to make me bleed 1,000 times before. You have to make me bleed all my blood before I go to the ground. You need to kind of have that. Ruthless Daniel Garcia. And I think that would be good if you have that with MJF. So I think that's good with MJF. I also will say that another thing that you want to do is eventually Adam Copeland's going to come back. What I want to see is Adam Copeland versus Jack Perry for the TNT title. Adam Copeland beats Jack Perry, and then what you do is you actually have Daniel Garcia versus Adam Copeland. And the reason why you do that was that Adam Copeland was kind of a mentor to Daniel Garcia, so I really just kind of think that it makes sense for them to have a match, and then you can actually have eventually Daniel Garcia beats him, because you need to kind of do something with Daniel Garcia where, he's actually, beating legends. You're giving him a bit of a run, really. He's beating legitimate people. So, what would happen if he held the U.S. title and, maybe after a while he goes after the TNT title, or something like that. Really, he loses to somebody fair and square. You get to the next person involved, type of thing. But you could also do that too. You moves on to the TNT title, and he faces Adam Copeland. The next thing that I said is that definitely if you look at two other things, he can be in Ring of Honor, really, because you look at Sammy Guevara, because they were, because remember like what happened with Sammy Guevara in Ring of Honor, like Chris Jericho held the title. They had that triple threat match. A lot of people were cheering for Sammy Guevara at Full Gear. I believe it was 2022, where people wanted to see Sammy Guevara actually hold the ROH championship, have somebody new, have somebody different. And then people got mad that Chris Jericho retained because it's like the old veteran gets the ROH title. So, what would have happened if you do something like say, okay, well, Sammy Guevara becomes the ROH champion, he becomes a heel again, and then what happens is that, you have heel Sammy Guevara versus babyface Daniel Garcia, or what would happen if you have Mark Briscoe, and what I would like to see is that it's actually Mark Briscoe, you do Mark Briscoe versus Daniel Garcia, or Mark Briscoe, versus, versus Adam Page or something like that. Like, put it on, like, one of the EVPs, and then you have, then eventually Daniel Garcia can go after that as one of the contenders, to win a title that way. It would make ROH look good, because it's like now you have people who are becoming bigger and better, and the ROH titles are actually something that means something. So that could be a good thing. Or another thing I was saying is that what would happen if, Dustin Rhodes, he's a little bit older, he can't go with the Von Erichs one time, or he gets injured, and then they do something like, Daniel Garcia and the Von Erichs, and you actually have them, they get stripped, they have to face another, because I think the rule is if you are in a 3-man team, if one of your people are injured, you get stripped of the title, really. So what would happen if Justin got injured in a storyline where he was injured and taken out, really, and then the titles were vacated, and then you have, maybe the Dark Order, and then you have the Von Erichs and Daniel Garcia this time, and then they win, and then they get the titles that way. That could be something with Daniel Garcia. I also just think that there's a couple of things I want to conclude this with. That there's the penultimate thing is that I think the big issue is that if he goes to WWE, he automatically loses his character. I think that the problem with Daniel Garcia right now is he has a lot of stories that he could do in AEW, and I think that he just has to follow through with these stories. Again, as I said, all this stuff about getting back at MJF, that could be a good story. That can make him a big star, really. But you look at what would happen if he went to WWE, that all gets removed from him. He has to start over. And then the other thing, too, is that I think with AEW, there's a lot more leeway. If you had kind of I want to kick MJF's ass, Daniel Garcia versus MJF, I think that would make a great story. That would bring him to another level, really. I do think that if you put him in NXT, most people don't know who he is, really, so he's going to be like another wrestler on there, and that maybe and I don't think that he's going to be pushed very, very bigly unless he actually, I don't think he's going to be pushed big because, again, he has to work on a character, and they may say something like, okay, you were abused by your father, you're trying to use that anger and violence and vitriol to motivate you. We can't do that because that's WWE. This is WWE. This is not the Attitude Era. They're still PG, so that's not going to work. And then also too, there's more of a chance to make it to the top in AEW because there's a lot less people. Like if you were in WWE, Daniel Garcia has to deal with so many people, and if you start in NXT and he says something like, I should be at the Royal Rumble, I should go main event roster, they could fire him on the spot for suggesting that, really. So there's a lot more growing room that he can do in AEW. I think the big thing is that he really needs to self-advocate and say, okay, Tony, this is how I want to do things, this is what I think is the best booking, and I think at least, have him come back and have a feud with MJF, and that's the thing that he should do, really, and then eventually win the title, and then go from there, really. Be off to the races. Maybe actually to have a U.S. title versus Will Ospreay and take it from there. Or you may do something where he drops the title and where he loses to somebody else, or he says something like, you know what, I want to go after the TNT title once Adam Copeland has it, because Adam Copeland's like a mentor to him. What would happen if you actually had Daddy Magic and Daniel Garcia become a tag team, or they find somebody else in the group and they become a 6-man tag team, and or ROH 6-man team. There's so many things you can do with him. So he just has to kind of self-advocate. And if Tony's like, he doesn't really have a plan for him, I would say, just do what I think what Cornette was saying. Just be there for like 3 more years, and see what happens really, and then go to WWE. Or maybe like TNA might be a better option for him, because at least in TNA, I think they have the same idea. They need to push new stars. They need to make things a little bit bigger for them. So I do think in TNA wrestling he could stand out more. I think he just has to apply himself. He could be a little more edgy there. But I do think, as I said, I think that Tony has to have big plans for him, or Daniel Garcia has to self-advocate and say, there are big plans, and we have to go by them. But we'll have to go by them the right way, really, because he's not going to waste his time, really. So I do think with Daniel Garcia, he can definitely, make a difference and all that.